The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical prayer above the ICU at Sacred Heart in Raleigh. 3 in the morning. The shift where time moved differently, stretched and thinned like taffy pulled too long. Danielle Ross moved through the corridor with the kind of quietness that made her almost invisible, her pressed scrubs pristine white against skin marked by scars that told stories nobody asked to hear. 19 years she'd been doing this. 19 years of night shifts, of keeping her head down, of letting people assume a nurse was just a nurse. They didn't know. They never did. The elevator doors whispered open on the 3rd floor, and she stepped into the ICU proper. Room 309 needed vitals checked. Room 312 needed a dressing change. Room 317, the transfer that had come in at midnight, needed assessment. Routine. Everything was routine here, which was exactly how she preferred it. Routine meant nobody paid attention. Routine meant she could work without questions, without the weight of eyes trying to read what she kept carefully hidden beneath her professional demeanor. She stopped at her locker in the staff room, the one in the corner nearest the supply cabinet. The metal was cool against her palms as she adjusted her scrubs, the neckline sitting precisely where it should. Her left forearm bore a scar that ran from wrist to elbow, pale white now, faded with time, but still visible if someone looked closely enough. She kept it covered when possible, but the June heat in Raleigh made that difficult. The scar was from Kandahar, 2003, when shrapnel from an RPG had caught her during the evacuation of a Phi base. She'd wrapped it herself with field gauze while keeping pressure on a contractor's femoral artery. Priorities. You treated the worst wound first. The badge clipped to her waistband read, D. Ross, RN, ICU. Nothing more. No rank. No call sign. No history. That was the point. Room 317 door stood ajar. The new transfer. She'd seen the chart when she'd clocked in, triple amputee, IED strike in Marja, classified intel flags on the file that meant CIA involvement, redacted mission details that she absolutely was not cleared to see. Standard protocol with these cases. Keep it quiet. Keep it professional. Ask no questions. She pushed the door open slowly. The room smelled like antiseptic and something else, fear, maybe, or pain, or the particular chemical smell of a life preserved by modern medicine. The patient lay unconscious, morphine drip keeping him sedated. Sergeant Marcus Webb, according to the chart. His right arm lay on top of the blanket, the left tucked beneath it. Both legs gone below the knee. The bed rails padded in case he thrashed during nightmares. His jacket hung on the chair beside the bed. Danielle's hands went still for just a moment, a pause so brief that nobody would have noticed if anyone had been watching. Which they weren't. This was the witching hour, when the hospital held its breath and most of the staff huddled in break rooms or at nursing stations, working through charts and coffee. She reached for the jacket without thinking about it. 20 years of muscle memory. Identify the patient by more than a name band. Check their effects. Understand who you're treating. The patch was sewn into the inside lining, positioned where a shoulder would rest against it if you wore the jacket. Faded olive drab. The unit insignia, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, Dark Horse Company. Her company. Her patch. She'd worn the identical one 2 decades ago when she pulled a bleeding Afghan child from the rubble of a collapsed market in Marja, rounds from a sniper's rifle walking closer with each second, shrapnel from detonations falling like rain. The child had lived. 2 of her teammates hadn't. Danielle's breath came steady. No tremor. No spike in pulse. This was information. Nothing more. Coincidence. Plenty of Marines served in Dark Horse. Plenty of patients came through with classified files and CIA handlers. This meant nothing. But her hands knew it meant everything. She was still holding the jacket when the door opened behind her. Dr. Caldwell. The ICU director. Silver hair, tailored lab coat that probably cost more than her monthly car payment, and the kind of expression that suggested he'd just tasted something spoiled. Nurse Ross. His voice moved like a key turning in a lock. Reading the patient's file. She lowered the jacket. Set it back on the chair with the same care she'd lifted it. Turned to face him. Just identifying the patient by personal effects, doctor. Standard protocol. Standard protocol doesn't include reviewing classified medical records. His eyes were the color of ice water, and they held hers with the weight of a heavy hand. I noticed his file flagged you as accessing restricted sections. The CIA handler notes. The redacted mission details. There was no good answer to this. Denial would look like a lie. Honesty would look like a violation of security protocol. She'd made a mistake, one small moment of recognition overriding the careful discipline of 19 years. One micro-expression must have shown on her face. One glance held a half-second too long. I wasn't reading it, sir. Her voice stayed level. The file was open when I entered the room. I noted the security flags and closed it immediately. Did you? It wasn't a question. His gaze moved from her to the jacket, then back to her face. Something flickered behind his eyes, the movement of a predator catching a scent it didn't recognize. That's not how the system logs it. According to our access records, you pulled his full chart at 12:11 a.m. Spent 42 seconds on the classified sections. The room went so quiet you could hear the ventilator whooshing its mechanical breath. Her heart rate remained 68. She'd practiced this, the art of looking calm when your mind was calculating 17 different escape routes and 9 different justifications. My mistake, sir. Composed. Deferential. The careful voice of someone knowing their place. I did review the file. I should have requested clearance first. You should have. He stepped closer to the bed, his movements carrying the particular grace of someone accustomed to control. He looked at Webb's chart, then at the jacket. Interesting. You have any connection to this patient, Nurse Ross? Any reason you'd be curious about his classified details? No, sir. The lie was perfect. Smooth as glass. Just curiosity. Poor judgment on my part. But that wasn't the worst part. What happened next changed everything, though she wouldn't understand how completely until much later. Dr. Caldwell's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He set the chart down with deliberate precision. Your shift ends in 4 hours. I'll be speaking with HR regarding this security violation. In the meantime, you'll remain in the general med-surg rotation. You're off this patient as of now. Off the ICU entirely, effective immediately. She didn't respond. Responses could be used against you. Responses showed emotion. Do you understand me? He continued, his voice taking on the edge of steel. Yes, sir. For words. That was all. He studied her face like he was trying to read something written in a language he didn't quite understand. A nurse caught violating security protocols should be nervous. Should be defensive. Should show something, anger, fear, desperation. Danielle Ross showed nothing at all. I want you reassigned to night shift, permanent, he said finally. Away from the secure wing. And I'll be documenting this incident. If there are any further violations, we'll be having a conversation about your future at Sacred Heart. Are we clear? Crystal clear, Doctor. He turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. One last look at her, and then at the jacket, and then back. The wheels in his head were turning. She could see it happening, the moment he decided something. The moment a small curiosity became something larger. Something that would require his attention. And Ms. Ross. His hand rested on the door frame. Stay away from classified files. It's a good way to lose your career. Stay away from this patient. And if I find out you've discussed this patient with anyone else on the unit, we're done. Understood, sir. When he finally left, she stood perfectly still for exactly 8 seconds. Then she resumed her assessment of the room, checking full lines and monitors with the precision of someone who'd done this work for nearly 2 decades. Her hands were steady. Her breathing unchanged. Her face blank as fresh snow. But beneath that composed exterior, something had shifted. Something that had been dormant, carefully contained, pressed down under the weight of years spent being invisible, had just started to wake. The monitor beeped steadily. O2 sat 97%. Heart rate 72. Blood pressure stable. Sergeant Marcus Webb remained unconscious, unaware that the woman now charting his vitals was anyone other than just another nurse working the overnight shift. He had no idea who was standing beside his bed. And she had no idea that everything, absolutely everything, was about to change. The next morning, Danielle is changing vitals on a medical surgical patient when her charge nurse catches her eye and jerks her chin toward the ICU secure wing. Dr. Caldwell is standing at Marcus Webb's bedside, and he's waiting for her. She knows it the moment she sees his posture, the way his shoulders square when she approaches the open door, the way his eyes fix on her like a hunter tracking prey. Mrs. Webb sits in the corner chair, her hands trembling. 3 other nurses cluster near the monitor bank, pretending to read screens but watching everything. Nurse Ross. Caldwell's voice carries the weight of a gavel. Step inside. She steps inside. The door doesn't close behind her. It stays open, a stage for an audience. I need to discuss your conduct regarding patient confidentiality. His tone is buttersmooth, the voice of a man who has orchestrated this moment perfectly. Specifically, your unauthorized access to Sergeant Webb's classified medical file yesterday. The one clearly marked restricted. The one you read for, he pauses, checking his notes with theatrical precision, for minutes and 17 seconds. Danielle stands still. Her hands are at her sides, palms open. The fluorescent lights above hum their mechanical pulse. I'm wondering, Nurse Ross, or should I call you our little file snoop, what possible clinical reason warranted your interest in this patient's sealed records? Caldwell moves between her and Mrs. Webb with the fluid certainty of a man who knows the room belongs to him. Perhaps you were looking for disability fraud tips. Maybe checking his VA status for some personal reason. The accusation hangs in the air like a blade. Mrs. Webb's face goes white. One of the nurses gasps softly. Danielle feels the weight of every eye in the room, feels the heat of their judgment settling on her shoulders like ash after an explosion. She takes one measured breath. In through her nose. Out through her mouth. The breath of someone who has waited under sniper fire for 17 minutes without moving. A single tear escapes her left eye. Just one. It rolls down her cheek with the precision of a drop of water finding its path. She doesn't wipe it away immediately. She lets it exist for a fraction of a second, lets the room see it, lets them believe they finally cracked something real. Then she wipes it. Without breaking eye contact. Without looking away from Dr. Caldwell's carefully composed face. Some wounds don't show on imaging, Doctor, she says quietly. The words are so soft that Mrs. Webb has to lean forward to hear them. The 3 nurses go absolutely still. Caldwell's jaw tightens, just barely, just enough that Danielle sees the muscle flex beneath his skin. He wasn't expecting her to speak at all. He certainly wasn't expecting her to speak like that, with the kind of calm that comes from having already survived worse. I see, he says, his voice losing its butter edge and becoming something harder. Well, that comment only underscores my concerns about your judgment. He walks to the door, his movement sharp and controlled. He's carrying a sheaf of papers, and he doesn't look back as he addresses the room. Effective immediately, Nurse Ross is reassigned to permanent night shift on the medical surgical floor. She is barred from the secure wing until further notice. Her access badge will be updated within the hour to reflect these restrictions. He turns to face her one final time, and there's something in his expression that looks almost like hunger. We need someone less curious in sensitive areas. Danielle nods once. A single, precise movement of her chin. She doesn't argue. She doesn't defend herself. She doesn't even blink. She turns and walks out past the 3 nurses, past Mrs. Webb's weeping silence, past Dr. Caldwell's calculating stare. Her scrubs are pressed. Her posture is perfect. Her hands are steady. But the unit floor goes absolutely silent in her wake, the kind of silence that happens when something has fundamentally shifted in the room's atmosphere. The kind of silence that follows a warning. By the time she reaches the nurse's station, the information has already spread through Sacred Heart like fire through dry brush. She can see it in the way conversations stop when she passes. She can feel it in the temperature drop when she enters the break room at lunch. For nurses are sitting around the table, Rodriguez, Chen, a new resident she trained last month, and someone from the evening shift. The moment Danielle walks through the door, all four of them stand up simultaneously. Not quickly. Not panicked. Just a coordinated, deliberate movement that says everything about what they've been told. Rodriguez grabs her bag. Chen reaches for her half-eaten sandwich. The new resident she trained, a kid named Stevens who came to her 3 weeks ago asking for tips on pediatric resuscitation, won't meet her eyes as he walks past. One of them knocks over a coffee cup in their haste. The cup clatters against the tile floor with a sound like an accusation. The break room door swings shut behind them. Danielle stands alone in the kitchen. There's a coffee maker humming. A microwave blinking 12 o'clock. The smell of old coffee and something microwaved too many times. She reaches for the cup that was knocked over. It's not broken. Some things are harder to destroy than they look. The department meeting is scheduled for 2 o'clock. Caldwell stands at the front of the conference room with his arms crossed, and he waits until every nurse, resident, and tech is seated before he speaks. "We're making some staffing adjustments to ensure optimal unit organization," he says, his eyes finding Danielle in the third row. Nurse Ross will be moving to permanent nights on medical surgical. This decision reflects our commitment to appropriate clinical boundaries and professional conduct. The room is so quiet you can hear the fluorescent lights buzz. "Any questions?" Caldwell's voice is smooth as polished steel. "No?" "Excellent. Let's move on to summer scheduling." Nobody looks at Danielle. Nobody whispers. The silence is deliberate and complete, the kind of silence that isolates a person more effectively than any words could. As the meeting ends, Danielle collects her folder and stands to leave. 20 staff members watch her back as she walks toward the door. A young resident she's never worked with leans close to his colleague and whispers something. The colleague's eyes widen slightly. Danielle doesn't need to hear the words to know what's being said. She can read it in the pattern of accusation, in the way rumors move through hospital floors like virus transmission. File snoop. Theft. Inappropriate access. Liability. She stops at her assignment clipboard at the nurse's station. Someone has written something on it in blue pen. She stares at it for exactly 3 seconds. File creep. She picks up the clipboard. She walks to the trash can. She doesn't tear the paper off. She doesn't erase it. She simply drops the entire clipboard into the waste bin and walks to the locker room to change out of her day shift scrubs. The night shift begins at 7 o'clock. Danielle is assigned to the medical surgical floor, a full floor away from the secure ICU wing where Marcus Webb is recovering. Her new badge has been updated. When she tries to access the secure wing doors at 7:33 p.m. to check on a patient's orders, the reader flashes red. A soft, accusing red. Access denied. Access denied. Access denied. She stares at the red light for 5 seconds. Then she turns and walks back to her assigned floor. But that wasn't the worst part. Over the next 4 nights, Danielle notices something wrong with Marcus Webb's chart in the electronic system. His anticoagulation protocol has been discontinued without explanation, no physician note, no clinical justification. For a triple amputee on bed rest, this is a ticking clock toward catastrophic pulmonary embolism. Blood clots that will form in his immobile legs and migrate to his lungs. Death arriving silently in the darkest hours of the night. She tries to send a secure message to Dr. Caldwell flagging the concern. An automated response bounces back, You are not authorized to communicate regarding secure wing patients. She approaches the charge nurse on the ICU side, one of the three who watched her humiliation without flinching. Marcus Webb's anticoagulation protocol has been discontinued. There's no order in the system. He's at. Dr. Caldwell said you're not to involve yourself with that patient, the charge nurse says flatly, without looking up from her computer. Focus on your assigned floor. His PE risk is not your concern anymore, Danielle. The words are a door slamming. A boundary. A wall. That evening, during her shift, Danielle glances through the break room window toward the parking lot and sees Dr. Caldwell standing near the entrance, his phone pressed to his ear. He's pointing at her, actually pointing, while he speaks to someone on the other end of the line. His expression is calculating, almost predatory. She can't hear his words, but she can read his body language perfectly. It's the posture of someone making a very specific point to a very specific person. 2 hours later, she's called to HR. The human resources manager is a woman named Patricia Chen with kind eyes and a professional smile that doesn't quite reach those eyes. She's holding a piece of paper. We've received a complaint from Dr. Caldwell regarding your behavior, Patricia says carefully. Specifically, your fixation on a patient you're no longer assigned to. He's concerned about boundary violations and potential HIPAA breaches. I was trying to flag a critical medication discontinuation that could result in. Danielle. Patricia's voice is gentle but final. Dr. Caldwell has made it very clear that this needs to stop. Any further interference with that patient will result in immediate termination. Do you understand? She understands perfectly. That night, Danielle drives home to her studio apartment in the Ridgemorn complex, a place with thin walls and neighbors she's never met. The apartment is clean. Orderly. The bed is made with hospital corners, an old habit from another life. On the counter sits a single photograph in a frame. Her Special Forces team in Marja, 23 years ago. 14 soldiers standing in the shadow of a firebase wall. Half the faces have been marked with small gold star stickers, the kind a child might use to grade a report card. Her hand steady as she placed those stickers, year after year, each one a death she carried like shrapnel under her skin. She picks up the frame. She doesn't open it. She just holds it and watches the faces of the dead stare back at her with the kind of calm that only comes from having finally seen the worst thing the world can offer. Outside, rain begins to fall against the windows. It starts soft. Then it becomes thunder. For nights. That's what Danielle had endured on the medical surgical floor since Caldwell's reassignment order came down like a guillotine. For nights of fluorescent haze and patients who needed her but didn't know her. 48 hours folded into a week that felt like a month. The med-surg ward was a different universe from the ICU, slower, less critical, designed for recovery rather than the razor-edge moments where milliseconds determined whether someone lived or died. She moved through those nights like a ghost moving through rooms that weren't hers, changing bandages, administering antibiotics through peripheral lines, documenting vital signs with the mechanical precision of someone clocking out her sentence. But her thoughts never left room 317. On the fourth night, she overheard Caldwell in the scheduling office talking to the charge nurse. His voice had that particular cadence of someone making a decision that wasn't up for discussion. The overnight shift on ICU needs fresh perspectives, he said. Rotate out Martinez and Holloway. Pull the new graduate from orientation. She needs exposure to critical patients at night. It's part of the learning curve. The charge nurse, a woman named Patricia who'd been at Sacred Heart for 17 years, hesitated. Doctor, she's only been here 3 weeks. She hasn't completed her competency evaluations for unstable patients yet. Caldwell smiled without teeth. Then she'll learn faster under pressure. He walked away before Patricia could argue. Danielle felt something shift inside her. Cold calculation replacing concern. The pattern was too clean, too deliberate. A new nurse. Solo coverage. On the night shift when attending physicians made rounds but didn't linger, when the fellows were managing multiple floors, when a patient crashing in room 317 would have minutes, not seconds, before help arrived. She texted a friend still working the ICU unit, someone named Reeves who'd transferred from the trauma ward. The response came 3 minutes later: new girl, solo. Caldwell's orders. Why? Danielle didn't answer. She worked her shift on the med-surg floor that night with her hands moving on muscle memory, for starts, medication passes, documentation, while her tactical mind ran scenarios. Caldwell had enough access to manipulate staffing. Enough institutional authority to make it look routine. Enough distance to maintain plausible deniability if something went wrong. What she didn't understand was the end game. Why would a physician with a career, with reputation and credentials intact, deliberately engineer a scenario where a patient might die? Unless the patient wasn't supposed to survive anyway. Unless there was something about Marcus Webb worth silencing. When her shift ended at 7 in the morning, Danielle drove home and sat in her apartment with her laptop open to nothing in particular. She didn't sleep. She sat in a chair by the window overlooking the parking lot, watching the light change, thinking about the unit patch she'd seen sewn into Webb's jacket lining. The same patch her team wore. The same unit that operated in Marja when she was a major. 20 years dissolved into 3 seconds of recognition, and Caldwell had seen that recognition happen. She showered at 5 in the afternoon. Changed into jeans and a grey sweater. Put her hospital badge in her bag but didn't clip it to her belt. Drove to Sacred Heart with the sun bleeding orange across the western sky and found a parking spot in the visitor lot with a clear view of the ICU wing. Room 317 was visible from this angle. She could see the window, the small square of light that meant monitors were running, that someone was in there breathing because machines were breathing for him. She sat in her car with the engine off. 7:15 p.m. The evening shift was in full swing. Nurses moving between rooms. The new graduate, Danielle had seen her during orientation, remembered the uncertainty in her posture, was probably starting her solo assignment right now, learning the rhythm of overnight critical care with a kind of baptism by fire that broke some people and forged others. 11:44 p.m. came and went like any other minute. The alarm started at 12:23 a.m. Even from the parking lot, she saw the code blue lights flashing in room 317. Red. Blue. Red. Blue. Strobing against the window like a siren in visual form. The overhead speaker crackled, and a voice she didn't recognize said the words that made every nurse in the building's nervous system stand up: Code Blue, ICU Room 317. Code Blue, ICU Room 317. Danielle moved before the second announcement finished. Her car door open. Her feet hitting asphalt. Running toward the hospital's main entrance because the stairwell near the ICU would be locked without her badge access, and the elevator would take 30 seconds she didn't have. Her left leg, the one that had taken shrapnel in Kandahar, the one that still ached on cold mornings, screamed with each impact, but pain was just data. Pain meant she was moving. Pain meant she was alive. Security stopped her at the ER entrance. You're off duty. A young officer, probably mid-20s, with the kind of authority that came from a uniform rather than presence. ICU. Now. She didn't ask. The difference between a question and a command lives in the voice, and hers had dropped an octave. I'll need to check your credentials. The overhead speaker announced the code again. Room 317. Pulseless. No time for credentials. No time for protocol. She moved left, and when the officer reached for her arm, she pivoted smoothly, using his own momentum against him, and pushed past without breaking stride. He didn't follow. They never did once they understood what they were actually standing in front of. The stairs were concrete and fluorescent lit. Her sweater caught the overhead light like water. She could hear her own breathing and nothing else, a tactical calm that had saved her life more times than she could count. 4th floor. 5th floor. The stairwell door burst open and she was in the ICU hallway, and the world compressed into a single room. The new graduate was standing frozen. Her hands shook. Her eyes had the look of someone watching a car crash in slow motion, present but not present. The monitor above Marcus Webb's bed showed pulseless electrical activity, the electrical pattern that meant his heart was firing signals but not actually contracting, pumping nothing, delivering nothing. His chest was still. His face was grey. The ventilator was doing the work his lungs couldn't do, pushing air in and out of a body that was shutting down. A massive pulmonary embolism. Exactly what Danielle had predicted. Exactly what should have been prevented by proper anticoagulation on the day he arrived. Exactly what a certain surgeon had failed to order. She crossed the room in 3 steps. Call the attending. Now. The new graduate didn't move. Now, Danielle said again, and this time there was iron underneath the word. The young nurse reached for the phone with trembling hands. Behind them, Danielle could see the code cart. She could see the defibrillator pads on Marcus's chest. She could see that nobody had pushed epinephrine yet, the medication board was empty, waiting for someone to know what to do. The clock was running. A human brain can survive for minutes without oxygen. After that, the damage becomes permanent. After that, survival means nothing because the person inside the body is already gone. "Where's Caldwell?" Danielle asked, not really expecting an answer. The new nurse, still on the phone, mouthed something. "Out." "Not here." Of course he wasn't here. He'd engineered this to happen when he could prove he was somewhere else. 30 minutes away, probably, with witnesses and credit card receipts and the kind of alibi that would hold up in an investigation. He'd set the board, and now he was watching from a distance to see if his piece would fall the way he'd planned. The attending arrived in 45 seconds, not a physician Danielle recognized. A woman in her 60s with grey hair and the kind of competence that came from decades of emergency medicine. She took in the monitor, the patient, the new nurse's panic, and Danielle standing at the foot of the bed with her hands already moving toward the crash cart. "Who are you?" the attending asked, not as a challenge but as a clarification. She predicted the PE, the new nurse said, her voice small. She told me to watch his anticoagulation, but the orders. "Let's get a large bore in the femoral," Danielle said. Not a suggestion. A statement of fact. The attending looked at her. Really looked at her. At the civilian clothes. At the way she was standing. At the tactical precision in her posture that screamed something other than floor nurse. But she also looked at the monitor. She looked at the clock. She looked at a patient who was dying in her hospital while everyone stood around trying to figure out chain of command. "Do it," the attending said. The crash cart was close enough. Danielle opened it and her hands moved with memory that lived deeper than muscle, that lived in the bones of someone who'd done emergency medicine in the field, where the field meant dirt and noise and nothing but a knife and whatever you could carry. She pulled the 18-gauge needle, felt the weight of it in her palm. It was familiar in her hands the way old weapons are familiar. The way home is familiar. But that wasn't the worst part. That wasn't the moment when everything began to unravel. That was just the beginning of the moment when Dr. Caldwell's careful architecture started to crack. The code blue alarm split the parking lot like a siren splitting night air. Danielle froze mid-step, cardboard box of discharge paperwork still balanced against her hip. 3 months of night shifts, 3 months of invisible work, and that sound meant only one thing: someone was dying on the floor she'd just been forced to abandon. The alarm wailed again. Her muscles knew before her mind caught up. She dropped the box. Scattered papers, termination letter, badge deactivation form, a handwritten note from the charge nurse saying "I'm sorry," fluttered across wet asphalt like snow. She ran. 12 years of military training doesn't leave your body. It lives in your ligaments, in the fast-twitch muscle fibers that remember desert heat and the smell of diesel fuel and the moment when hesitation costs lives. Her legs carried her across the parking lot at a sprint, rain hammering her face, her clothes still damp from the bus stop vigil. Her mind was already 3 steps ahead, already calculating oxygen saturation curves and anticoagulation protocols and the specific way Marcus Webb's labs had been trending toward something catastrophic. The emergency doors burst open and she was inside. The ICU was chaos, measured, professional chaos, but chaos nonetheless. Alarm bells screaming. The intercom crackling a code blue announcement she'd already heard outside. A resident named Chen stood frozen outside Webb's room, eyes wide, tablet dropped at his feet. Behind him, a newer nurse she barely recognized, couldn't have been more than 24, first month on the unit, was yelling for help but not moving, not acting, the way untrained people freeze when adrenaline hits. Danielle didn't slow down. She shoved through the doorway and saw Marcus Webb's monitor immediately, the telltale flat line of ventricular fibrillation, the one that meant his heart had quit talking and started screaming. His skin was already graying. The ventilator was breathing for him, but oxygen meant nothing if blood wasn't pumping. She was moving before the thought finished forming, hands already reaching for his sternum, muscle memory from a phi base in Kandahar where she'd done this 17 times in 1 week while mortars walked closer with each concussion blast. Draw up epi. 1 milligram for push, she barked at the frozen nurse. Call respiratory. Get me a thoracotomy tray. Now. The nurse stammered something about waiting for the attending. Danielle's voice dropped to the register that had once commanded a 17-person squad through a minefield. He'll be dead in 3 minutes. Move. She didn't wait. Her hands found the crash cart, fingers moving with the certainty of muscle memory, and pulled a surgical scalpel from the instrument tray. Sterile field be damned, sterile didn't matter if the patient was already dead. She positioned the blade at the 5th intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, the exact spot where she'd done this before in a field hospital that had no electricity and only morphine from a bottle that had been opened 3 days prior. The scalpel bit through skin and muscle with that particular resistance that surgeons recognize, not hard, not soft, but the exact texture of living tissue. Blood welled immediately, soaking her civilian clothes, the same clothes she'd worn yesterday at the bus stop with her cardboard box and her cracked mug. Her hands didn't shake. Her hands moved like someone who'd done this while shells landed close enough to feel the pressure change in her ears. She clamped the edges open with a satin sky clamp, her breathing steady, her voice steady, narrating each step like she was teaching a resident instead of performing emergency cardiac surgery on the floor of an ICU where she'd been fired 14 hours earlier. The pulmonary artery was distended, purple with the clot that had lodged there sometime in the last 4 hours, the exact complication she'd warned Caldwell about, the exact scenario he'd enabled by pulling her off this patient's care. 2 residents had appeared in the doorway now, frozen in place, watching this off-duty nurse in blood-stained clothes perform battlefield medicine in an American hospital. Neither of them moved. Neither of them offered to help. This wasn't in their training protocols. This wasn't in their comfort zones. This was the kind of surgery that only happened in trauma centers and war zones, not in an ICU in Raleigh at 2 in the morning. Danielle's hand found the clot, evacuated it with steady precision, and her other hand was already inside the chest cavity, manually compressing Marcus's heart, feeling the muscle respond beneath her palm the way it had responded 17 other times. 1, 2, 3, the rhythm of compressions older than language, older than medicine, older than anything except the need to keep blood moving and oxygen flowing and a heartbeat alive. 30 seconds. The monitor went from flatline to irregular rhythm. 45 seconds. Sinus rhythm. A real heartbeat. Real perfusion. Marcus's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, just a moment, his pupils found hers through the haze of shock and anesthesia and the specific confusion that comes from nearly dying. His lips moved. The words came out barely a whisper, the kind of voice someone uses when they're calling across a distance they don't think they'll survive. Major Reaper. She went perfectly still. Not because she was shocked. Not because her composure cracked. She went still because recognition had just made the situation exponentially worse. The boy whose shattered leg she'd splinted with rifle parts while mortars walked closer, the kid who'd been 8 years old and bleeding out in a market district in Marja, was looking directly at her. And he remembered. The door burst open. Dr. Caldwell entered like something poisonous, his face registering the scene in stages, first confusion, then understanding, then fury. She was standing inside a patient's open chest cavity, blood soaking through her clothes, her hands inside living tissue, doing the work that only attending physicians were supposed to do. "What the hell did you do?" His voice was a whip crack. "Security! Remove her immediately!" She didn't pull her hands out of Marcus Webb's chest. Medical protocol dictated that she finish the procedure, stabilize the patient, ensure hemostasis before withdrawing. But Dr. Caldwell's fingers were already snapping, and 2 security guards were moving through the doorway with the mechanical certainty of men following orders. She practiced medicine without authorization, Caldwell announced to the room, to the residents, to the nurse. "This is assault. This is criminal." The guards took her arms. She didn't resist. Resistance would mean a struggle, would mean confirming every accusation he'd already made. She pulled her hands free of the surgical field with the kind of care that suggested she'd been doing exactly what she was supposed to do, and let them escort her toward the door while watching the monitor behind them. Sinus rhythm. Stable. Heart rate 78. O2 saturation 94%. Marcus Webb's eyes tracking her as she left. 20 minutes later, in Caldwell's office on the 4th floor, she stood while he sat in his leather chair and read a termination letter aloud as though she were a recalcitrant resident instead of a professional. Effective immediately. Grounds: practicing medicine without authorization, assault, breach of professional boundaries, violation of hospital protocol. He recommended the state medical board be notified, though he carefully didn't mention that she had no medical license, that she'd never claimed to have one, that she was technically not guilty of practicing medicine because she'd never practiced anything except nursing. What he did instead was worse. He picked up the phone and made 4 calls, each one to a hospital administrator whose name he knew, whose number he had saved in his phone, whose position gave him leverage. She stood in his office and heard him tell each one that Danielle Ross was a security risk, that she'd violated protocols, that he couldn't recommend her for hire at any level. His voice was calm. His words were carefully chosen. He wasn't making accusations he couldn't support, he was simply speaking professional concerns to professional colleagues. By the time he hung up the 4th phone, her employment prospects in the entire state had evaporated. That evening, the rain came harder. The kind of rain that sounded like applause on metal, that turned bus stops into small dark caves where the homeless and the unemployed waited for buses that were running behind schedule. Danielle stood under the shelter with a cardboard box balanced on her hip, the same box that had held 12 years of accumulation in a shared hospital locker. Inside it was a ceramic mug with a chip in the rim, a succulent plant that had stopped growing 3 weeks ago, and a photograph of her team, 14 people in desert camouflage, sun-bright and impossibly young, standing in front of a firebase that had been overrun 17 months later. Half the faces were crossed out in gold star stickers. She stared at the photograph while rain hammered the metal roof of the shelter. The stickers were old, applied over years, some of them starting to peel at the edges. 7 faces crossed out. 7 people who'd gone into the ground before she did, their careers ending not in Raleigh but in places where she couldn't help them, couldn't save them, couldn't do anything except remember their voices and the way they laughed and the specific way they'd smelled like gunpowder and diesel and home. The bus pulled up, hydraulics hissing like a living thing, and she stepped on with her cardboard box and her cracked mug and her photograph of the dead. The driver didn't look at her. Nobody ever looked at her. That had been the whole point. The entire architecture of her invisibility, work the night shift, keep her head down, let nobody know that the tired nurse in the corner had once commanded men and women whose names were now marked with gold stars. But that architecture was collapsing. And when it fell, it would take everything with it. The bus pulled away from Sacred Heart, and she didn't look back. The rotor wash hit the parking lot like a physical force, scattering papers across the asphalt in a chaotic dance. 2 UH-60M Blackhawks descended towards Sacred Heart's helipad as the morning sun broke through clouds the color of battleship steel. Below, in the ICU, the monitors beeped their steady rhythm, the same rhythm they'd beeped every morning for the past 3 months while Danielle Ross worked her shifts in silence, speaking only when necessary, her presence like furniture someone had forgotten was in the room. The helicopters touched down at 6:19 a.m. Four operators in dress blues disembarked, their movement synchronized, precise, the kind of movement that came from 10,000 repetitions under live fire. They bypassed the main entrance and walked directly past security, their bearing making it clear they weren't asking permission. The security guard barely reached for his clipboard before one of them, a lieutenant commander with silver oak leaves and eyes like polished gunmetal, simply said, "We need Major Danielle Ross. Call sign Reaper." It wasn't a request. It was a command. The ICU fell silent the way a forest goes silent when a predator enters. Phones stopped ringing. Conversations ended mid-word. Danielle was changing the dressing on Marcus Webb's right shoulder when the operators appeared in the doorway. She didn't look up. She knew exactly who they were. She'd been waiting for them since the moment Marcus whispered her call sign in the middle of his code blue, the moment he'd remembered. Marcus saw them first. His body went rigid for just a fraction of a second, then his eyes that had been dull with morphine and pain for 73 days, suddenly crystallized with recognition. He sat up in bed, moving faster than the doctors said he should be able to move, and spoke directly to the floor nurse standing frozen in the corner. "That's my CO. She carried me 6 clicks through enemy fire when I was 8. His voice came out steady, military-grade certain. "That's the person who saved my life. Twice." The floor nurse's face drained of color. She looked at Marcus. Then at Danielle. Then at the 4 SEAL operators standing in the doorway like they'd stepped out of a nightmare someone else was having. Danielle finished securing the dressing with the same methodical precision she brought to everything, each tape strip placed with the attention a surgeon gives to a closing suture. Then she turned, and the way she moved was different. The slight stoop that had come from months of avoiding attention straightened. The nurse's walk became something else entirely. A combat gait. Economical. Dangerous. The lieutenant commander stepped into the room. Behind him came a full NCIS investigator with a leather folder thick as a dictionary, and 2 federal agents whose suits fit the way they fit when you've got a badge underneath and authority walking beside you like a shadow. The hospital director, Dr. Patricia Chen, appeared in the corridor behind them, her face the color of old bone. The lieutenant commander opened the folder. His voice had the flat precision of someone reading a casualty report. Major Danielle Marie Ross. Service record, 12 years active duty, 3 overseas deployments, Kandahar Province 2013 through 2016. He looked up at the hospital staff gathering in the doorway. Bronze Star for leadership under fire. Pause. The silence was absolute. Silver Star. Another pause, longer. Every person in the hallway understood what was coming. Second Silver Star for rescue operations in Helmand Province. And he let the folder open fully, letting the light catch the next page, Navy Cross. For running back into a PHI base under sustained Taliban mortar fire to retrieve 3 military contractors after a structure collapse that was supposed to kill everyone inside it. Dr. Chen's hands were trembling visibly. The young nurse who had frozen during Marcus's code was crying silently, her hand over her mouth. The lieutenant commander's voice didn't change. It remained exactly level. Combat-related disability discharge, 2017, after taking fragmentation wound saving those same 3 contractors. Medically retired as major. He looked directly at Danielle. You've been recalled as an expert witness in a federal investigation into stolen valor and systematic medical fraud conducted by Dr. Harrison Caldwell. The room didn't just go quiet. The room stopped breathing. We also need to inform this facility, the NCIS investigator continued, pulling out a second folder with the careful deliberation of someone who had done this before, that security footage triggered by your initial file access 3 days ago, revealed that Dr. Caldwell has been billing the Veterans Affairs Department for surgical procedures that were never performed. 6 years of phantom surgeries on veteran patients. We're talking $1.7 million in fraudulent claims. One of the nurses who had left Danielle alone in the break room 12 weeks ago made a small sound, the sound of someone's entire understanding of the world shifting on its axis. Federal agents were already moving, heading toward Caldwell's office with a warrant that made the hospital director's face go from white to something approaching translucent. The ICU staff parted like water before them, their eyes following the agents, then finding Danielle again. The calculation was visible on their faces every moment they'd abandoned her, every conversation they'd stopped having when she walked into a room, every time they'd chosen Caldwell's favor over basic human decency. 42 minutes later, Dr. Caldwell was escorted from his office by 2 federal agents, his hands cuffed behind his back, his expensive watch catching the fluorescent light one last time before he disappeared around the corner. The same corner where he'd stood 3 months ago and watched Danielle being dragged out by security. The same corner where he'd smiled. He didn't look back at the ICU. He didn't need to. Every pair of eyes in the unit was watching him go, and the weight of those eyes, the eyes of people he'd threatened, manipulated, and compromised for years, was heavier than anything the federal system could impose. Dr. Patricia Chen appeared at Danielle's side with her hands shaking like aspen leaves in a windstorm. We had no idea. I mean, we should have had every idea. We should have, her voice broke. Your position is reinstated immediately. With full back pay. And a promotion. ICU Clinical Director, if you'll accept it. Effective immediately. Danielle nodded once. Her face remained unreadable, but something had shifted in her eyes. The eyes of someone watching a debt come due. The young nurse who had frozen during the code, the one who had called for help but whose hands had shaken too badly to do anything else, approached Danielle with fear written across every feature. You saved him. I'm sorry I couldn't, the words tangled up like wire. Danielle's voice, when it came, was gentle. Firm. The voice of someone who had trained too many young soldiers to blame themselves for survival. You called for help. That's what you're supposed to do. You did your job. But you ran back into a burning building. That's my job. Different job. Danielle paused, then added with the faintest hint of something that might have been dry humor, also, I'm going on break before someone decides to fire me again. The nurse almost smiled through her tears. Over the next 14 days, 5 other veterans came forward with documentation of phantom surgeries. A spine reconstruction that never happened. A cardiac valve replacement that existed only on billing forms. Procedures performed by a doctor who had been in his office reviewing hospital privileges while his patients lay in other facilities recovering from surgeries that had never actually occurred. The total came to $1.7 million, money that should have gone to veteran care instead of to the down payment on Caldwell's weekend house in the Outer Banks. His medical license was revoked by the North Carolina Medical Board. His wife filed for divorce on grounds of fraud and infidelity. His attorney negotiated a deal that kept him out of federal prison in exchange for full restitution, permanent surrender of medical credentials, and a public apology that nobody believed and nobody needed to hear. 1 month after the federal agents walked him out in handcuffs, Mrs. Webb, Marcus's mother, who had wept in the ICU waiting room for 73 days while her son fought through sepsis and organ failure, was driving through a shopping plaza off Fayetteville Road and saw something that made her pull over. Dr. Harrison Caldwell, standing under a canopy attached to a folding table, his revoked medical license framed behind him like a diploma, selling supplemental insurance policies to people passing by. The laminated sign read, "Former medical professional, I understand your needs." She took a photograph with her phone and sent it to Danielle with a single line, "Thought you'd want to see this." Danielle didn't respond. She just kept working. She trained the young nurse who had frozen during the code. She restructured the ICU's protocols for emergency procedures. She mentored for residents and 2 attending physicians. She did what she had always done, she helped people heal, quietly, without asking for anything except that the work be done right. 3 months later, on a Thursday evening when the thunderstorms were rolling in from the west like old ghosts coming home, Danielle stood on Sacred Heart's rooftop garden with Marcus Webb in his wheelchair. he'd regained 60% function in his remaining limbs through rehabilitation that she had personally coordinated, calling in favors from every physical therapist she knew, funding part of it out of her own pocket without telling anyone. The sky was bruising purple and gold. The smell of rain was coming, electric ozone mixing with hot asphalt from the summer that had been bleeding itself out into autumn. Marcus looked at the approaching storm. "Why didn't you tell anyone who you were?" His voice had come back stronger over the months. The infection in his lungs had cleared. The dreams had gotten fewer. Danielle watched the first clouds begin their roll. "Because I wasn't that person anymore. I thought I could just disappear into the work. You never stopped being Reaper." Marcus shook his head slowly, like he was explaining something obvious to someone who should have known better. "You just changed who you were saving." Mrs. Webb emerged from the stairwell carrying coffee in 3 paper cups, steam rising in delicate spirals. She handed one to Danielle and one to Marcus and settled into a chair beside her son. She looked at the woman who had gone from being abandoned by an entire hospital to being promoted to clinical director, and asked simply, "How do I ever thank you for that?" "For giving me my son back." "Twice." Danielle wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. The warmth was solid and real. "You don't. You just pass it forward when you can." Below them, visible through the windows of the ICU, the unit hummed with efficiency. The young nurse who had frozen during Marcus's code was there, moving with increasing confidence, taking on more responsibility, mentoring new staff. The break room, the one that had emptied the moment Danielle walked in 3 months ago, now filled with people asking her advice, seeking her guidance. The disciplinary notice that had been posted on the unit board had been replaced with her promotion announcement in gold lettering. The first drops of rain began to fall. Not a storm yet. Just a warning. The forerunner of what was coming. Marcus looked up at Danielle. "What would you tell Major Ross from 20 years ago if you could?" She didn't answer immediately. The rain was falling harder now, beginning to drum on the concrete roof, and the smell of wet asphalt mixed with dust and desert heat memories that didn't belong to a rooftop in Raleigh but had traveled with her anyway, packed into scars and muscle memory and the precise way her hands moved when someone's life depended on it. Finally, Danielle spoke with absolute certainty. "That power is not a title. Power is the ability to help. Everything else is just noise." The 3 of them sat in comfortable silence as the rain increased, watching the storm move eastward toward the ocean, carrying the weight of the past with it. Somewhere in a strip mall off Fayetteville Road, a revoked doctor was selling insurance from a folding table, reduced to a cipher, to a footnote, to nothing. And in an ICU in Raleigh, a nurse who had once been a major was rebuilding what systems had tried to destroy, one person at a time, one correct decision at a time, one moment of clarity at a time. If you're watching this, you know how rare that is. So here's what I need you to do. Like this video. Subscribe to this channel. Comment below and tell me, have you ever seen someone's true character revealed only after they'd already been underestimated? Because those stories matter. They're how we remember that power and title are never the same thing. And sometimes the person in scrubs pushing a mop or saving lives in the dark is carrying more authority than anyone in a suit will ever understand. Thank you for watching.